North Korea claiming a major advancement in its nuclear program with what it calls a successful underground test of a hydrogen bomb it claims can mount on an intercontinental ballistic missile. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says he's already drafting new sanctions against the rogue regime, but Missouri Senator Roy Blunt says sanctions may not have the teeth they really need.
Sanctions without Russia and China being interested in solving this problem don't work very well. I think the president putting everything on the table is not a bad thing right now, both for North Korea, but maybe more importantly for China, to be thinking about how consequential this behavior is.
Joining me now is Gordon Chang, author of Nuclear Showdown: North Korea Takes on the World. You called the North Korean test earlier this week a belligerent action. What's your analysis of this latest test?
Well, this certainly is 10 times more than its previous test on September 9th of last year. 120 kilotons. That could very well be the H-bomb that they claim. And clearly what they're doing is they think that the Trump administration's in chaos, but they also believe that China is not in a position to respond because you have Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, heading into the 19th Communist Party Congress, a very sensitive time for him. So I think that they probably believe that they can get away with a lot at this particular time, which is the reason why they detonated the nuke at this moment.
I've heard a lot of national security experts over multiple administrations saying North Korea is the problem that keeps them up at night. You've got U.S. troops in harm's way. You've got Seoul nearby. What are the options at this point?
Well, I think what we can do are really severe sanctions. I mean, what we should be talking about is an embargo. And if the Chinese and Russians don't want to participate in it, then, yeah, we can't force them, but we can impose costs on both Moscow and Beijing. So, for instance, we know that the largest Chinese banks have been involved in money laundering for the North Koreans. Bank of China cited in a 2016 UN report. You know, we could impose essentially a death sentence on the Chinese financial system, and that could have ripple effects throughout the Chinese political system. So I think Xi Jinping understands that President Trump, who's not bound by convention and conventional thinking, could actually just reach out and do something that would shock the Chinese.
Congressman Ron DeSantis, a Florida Republican, talked about the North Korea threat in terms of proliferation. Let's take a listen.
The danger is more than just what Kim would do with it himself. It's who would he give them to. And I think you talk about regimes like Iran. I mean, that would make the North Korea problem look much more manageable in comparison, because there you have a regime that truly is maniacal.
So what about the spread of their nuclear technology?
Well, we know the North Koreans sell everything that they produce. It's estimated that the Iranians pay the North Koreans somewhere between $2 and $3 billion a year for various forms of cooperation. That would include missiles, of course, but also nuclear weapons technology, because the North Koreans have hosted the Iranians on site for the first 5 nuclear tests. They probably were there today as well. We don't know that quite yet, but clearly the North Koreans sell this stuff. And by the way, Mike, the North Koreans have links to terrorist groups, and they have supplied stuff, and of course they sell chemical weapons to the Assad regime, probably paid for by Tehran.
Wow. Stunning stuff. We know that the UN Security Council is going to meet tomorrow in an emergency session. What can be done to get China fully engaged on this issue? Well,
I think that, it would be nice to think that we could convince the Chinese that it's in their interest to help us. But we've tried that approach for 2 decades, and it hasn't worked. So I'm afraid what we have to do is impose costs that are so severe that basically China has really no option but to help us. That's going to cause problems in our relationship with Beijing, but I think that they're absolutely necessary right now because, we've seen that China is supporting North Korea. And it's not just with economic trade and all the rest of it. It's also with confidence, supporting the regime, and technology for their ballistic missile and nuclear weapons program. That's dangerous, irresponsible. We need to stop that.
We know President Trump convened a meeting of his national security team this afternoon. Do you expect inside that meeting that there were few realistic options?
Well, I think that what we're now starting to do is hear some more of the drastic proposals, which we would have thought extraordinary and impossible just a month ago. So we heard Secretary Mnuchin talk about basically cutting off trade with North Korea and cutting off trade with those countries that trade with North Korea. And basically that's China and Russia. Now, the Chinese and Russians may think we don't have the political will to do it, But again, you know, when we believe that we have our backs against the wall, when the North Koreans are making fast progress, not only on their nukes, but on their missiles, I believe the president might actually be able to do something that's historic and a step in the right direction.
Briefly, you heard the language from Defense Secretary Mattis after that White House meeting. Your reaction to the wording?
Well, the use of the word annihilate, I think, it really is stark. It's sort of sends chill through the North Korean regime. And they're going to think about this, even though he said, we're not going to annihilate you. But by saying that, he's saying that's a real possibility, especially when the president said everything is under consideration.
Gordon Chang, thanks for your time. Great to have you on an important day.
Thanks, Mike.